God did not choose me because I was comfortable. He chose me because I was willing to walk.
The man 3 billion people on this planet called their father in the faith. The man Jews and Christians and Muslims all trace their spiritual line back to. The man God personally walked out of a city and made a covenant with under the stars was a dark-skinned African-looking man from a part of the world where everybody for 1,000 miles in every direction looked exactly like him. And someone has painted him for you as an old white grandpa in a bathrobe, leaning upon a wooden staff. Sit with that one. Abraham, father of nations. The man whose name was changed by God himself. The patriarch that every preacher in every black church in America has been quoting for 200 years. He was black, that man. Brown-skinned, featured African. His face was the weathered kind that you get from 60 years of walking across deserts on foot. The Bible never contradicted this. The geography never told me different. The bloodline never told me different. It wasn't a page. It was a paintbrush that masked. And we are going through all the receipts tonight, one by one, until there is no argument left. He came from, the book of Genesis says that Abraham was born in a place called Ur of the Chaldees. Ur was a real place. Archaeologists have excavated it. It was in the south of what we today call Iraq, along the banks of the Euphrates River, in what was known in the ancient world as Mesopotamia. The Chaldeans who lived there were a dark-skinned race. Their own carvings depict them with broad noses, thick lips, and skin ranging from deep bronze to near black. The sun in southern Iraq is merciless. Summer temperatures exceed 120 degrees. The people who had lived in that environment for thousands of years had the sort of bodies that the environment produces. That's the world Abraham was born into. That was his daddy Terah. That's where his grandpa came from. All of those ancestors back to Noah and beyond were of that same belt of brown and black-skinned people across the ancient Near East and Northern Africa. There is no version of the story where a pale man shows up in the middle of Ur of the Chaldees 4,000 years ago. The genetics don't allow. The climate doesn't permit it. The history won't allow it. All it has to go on is a painting some guy did in Italy 3,000 years after Abraham was already in the ground. Then God said to him, "Get lost." Genesis 12. Pack all. You, take your wife. Take your nephew with you. Call your servants. Take your cattle. Walk. This is what the text reads. He strode from Ur all the way up to Haran in the north, and then from Haran all the way down through the desert to a land called Canaan, which is the same land that later became Israel and Palestine. We're talking over 1,000 miles by foot, with women and kids and animals, over some of the toughest terrain on the planet. Open desert, hills of stone, wadis that flood in the rain and bake in the sun, month after month of walking. Now, picture the body that comes out of that kind of trip. Dark enough for the sun to find a new shade to add. Thick protective hair, feet calloused, hands like leather, a face chiseled by wind and heat. That is not the man in the picture with the smooth pink cheeks and the soft white beard. That is the desert chief. That is the kind of man who can stare down a king and lead an army of his own household servants into battle, which the book says Abraham actually did when his nephew Lot got kidnapped. 318 trained men of his own house. Abraham was a kingdom running inside a tent. He's not some frail old figure waving on the side of the road. He was the leader of a rising nation. And now his wife, Sarah. Sarah is lovely, the book says, so beautiful that 2 different kings tried to add her to their harem just to look at her. The first was the Pharaoh of Egypt. The book says that when Abraham went down into Egypt in a famine, Pharaoh's officials saw Sarah and took her into the palace because she was that striking. Now stop and think about that for a moment. Egypt in those days was an African kingdom ruled by African kings. The Egyptians painted themselves on the walls of their own tombs in shades varying from reddish brown to deep dark brown to black. According to all our accounts, the women of Egypt were the loveliest women in the ancient world. Sarah had to be part of that picture, not to contradict it, to walk into that palace and be recognized among the most beautiful African women on the continent. A sick woman in Pharaoh's court, out of touch, even repulsive to a culture that prized rich dark skin as the beauty standard. Sarah was right at home. Pharaoh wanted her because she was a striking upgrade to the type of woman he already had around him. Same color, same deal, simply awesome. That is the only way that the story is actually meaningful. The cover-up involves never picturing the scene. As soon as you think of it, it collapses. And then there's Hagar, Sarah's handmaid. The book says Hagar was an Egyptian, African black, born and bred in Egypt. Sarah could not have children herself, so she gave Hagar to Abraham as a second wife. Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. Now consider that family picture for a moment. Abraham, a brown man of Mesopotamia. Sarah, a brown-skinned woman from the same area. Hagar, a woman from Egypt, black African. And Ishmael was born, the son of Abraham and Hagar. That kid was African on his mother's side and Mesopotamian on his father's side. Both sides are brown. Ishmael was raised in the wilderness and became a skilled archer. He fought 12 sons who grew into 12 tribes of people who spread out over the Arabian Peninsula and parts of North Africa. Those tribes are still here. The Arab peoples are the children of Ishmael. The original Arabs, before the later waves of immigration and mixing, were dark-skinned. The earliest poetry from pre-Islamic Arabia celebrates the much coveted beauty of dark skin and the men who carried it. Ishmael begat Arabia, and so was his father Abraham. So Abraham was father of Arabia as well as father of Israel. The math does not stop being math because somebody doesn't want to do the calculation. Then Sarah bore a son to her, Isaac, the wonder child. She was 90. Abraham was 100 when he was born. That child belonged to the same family, the same blood, the same color as everybody else in the house. Isaac married a woman from his daddy's family back in Mesopotamia named Rebecca and settled down. Same folks, same color. And they had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, twins. Later, his name was changed to Israel, and his 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. So the whole nation of Israel comes through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob. All the Hebrews of the Old Testament, all prophets, all kings, any priest, all of them, one dark-skinned patriarch from southern Iraq who walked his family across 1,000 miles of desert to become the father of a people. And on the other hand of the family, the Arabs came from Ishmael. So Abraham literally is the genetic and spiritual father of 2 of the largest population groups in the entire Middle East and North Africa. Both of those groups in their original forms were dark-skinned peoples. The receipts are not concealed. The receipts are right there in the text next to the genealogies that people skip over because they think genealogies are boring. Now, for the covenant. This is where it really clinches it. God came to Abraham and made a covenant with him. The sign of that covenant was circumcision. Every male in Abraham's household was to be circumcised, and every male descendant thereafter for all generations. Now, here's what most people don't know. The rite of circumcision was an ancient African custom long before the birth of Abraham. The Egyptians had been circumcising their men at least 1,000 years before Abraham showed up. Archaeologists have found mummies from Egypt that have been circumcised. Egyptian tomb paintings show the procedure being carried out. It was a sign of cultural and spiritual purity in the African religious tradition, long before it became the sign of the Hebrew covenant. God did not create a new ritual for Abraham. God took an existing African practice and made it the sign of his covenant with a man whose family was already part of that wider cultural world. The relationship between Abraham's people and the African continent was not merely geographical. It was a custom. It was rehearsal. It was the same religious language in slightly different dialects of the same region. The cover-up requires you to think of Abraham as a stranger to Africa. The fact is, Abraham was already deeply embedded in the African world the moment he stepped into the story. And the Egypt connection is more than one famine. And the book says Abraham went down into Egypt in the famine. His grandson Jacob ended up going down into Egypt with his whole family, 70 people strong. The Hebrews lived in Egypt for 430 years. 430 years. That's longer than the United States has been a country. Generations were born in Egypt, lived their lives in Egypt, died in Egypt, and were buried in Egypt. The people coming out of Egypt had been living among Africans, marrying Africans, looking like Africans for centuries by the time Moses led them out. The book does tell us that a mixed multitude went up with them out of Egypt. With them went other Africans. By the time they left Egypt, the bloodline of Abraham's descendants was totally interwoven with the African continent. Whoever tries to imagine the Hebrews leaving Egypt as some pale European-looking mob is picturing something the text contradicts on every page. The Hebrews were African and Mesopotamian and everything in between, all of which categories fell on the brown to black side of the color spectrum. Now trace the line forward. Abraham was the father of Isaac, son of Isaac, Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, including Judah. The line continued through Judah for generations until it came to a shepherd boy named David, who became the king of Israel. And the book describes David in Hebrew as Adonai, a word meaning deep, reddish brown like the earth. David was a Negro. His son Solomon was black. The entire royal line of Israel was black. The line went all the way down to a young woman named Mary in a little town called Nazareth, carrying a baby boy named Jesus. And Jesus can trace his earthly bloodline all the way back through Mary, through David, through Judah, through Jacob, through Isaac, through Abraham. Same family, same color, same continent, from the patriarch in Ur to the Messiah in Bethlehem, unbroken. Every face in that line was brown. Everyone in that chain was African or Middle Eastern, in the truest sense of those words, before the modern shuffling of populations. The entire line is one color story from start to finish. Somebody handed your great-grandmama a picture of every link in that chain, looking like a different continent than the one the chain was actually forged on. Now, go look at the old images. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has been painting Abraham for over 1,500 years. They paint him as black, always had. They depict him with deep brown skin, a bushy black beard flecked with gray, and the sort of dignified African features that anyone passing through a black church in Birmingham or Atlanta would recognize as kin. He is painted the same way by the Coptic Christians of Egypt. Thus do the early Syrian Christian icons paint him. The earliest Christian art in the catacombs of Rome was painted by the first generations of believers. They depicted the patriarchs as dark-skinned men because the people who painted them had actually been to the region where those men came from and knew what the people there looked like. Even some of the old Jewish manuscripts from the medieval period in places like Yemen and North Africa show Abraham as a dark-skinned man because the Jewish communities living in those regions had preserved the original picture without ever being touched by European Renaissance art. The receipts have been in the oldest churches and the oldest synagogues for over 1,000 years. The cover-up only works on those who have only watched the European version. And the European edition was slow, real late. Even in European depictions of Abraham up until the 1400s, he was often depicted as dark-skinned or at least olive-complected. The Italian Renaissance put the final coat of paint on the lie. Rich patrons had masters paint scenes from the Bible, but with familiar European faces. Abraham began to look like a pale-skinned man with a long, flowing white beard, soft hands, and the sort of clothes a rich European elder would have worn. Within a few generations, that became the default image in every Bible printed in Europe. The original Abraham had been blotted from the imagination of the Western world, and the painted Abraham had so completely displaced him that most people today have never questioned the picture. In the colonies, the enslaved Africans were forced to convert to Christianity. The only Abraham they had ever seen was the European Abrahams, and they were told that pale old man was the father of their faith. Imagine hearing that the father of your faith resembled the man who owned you. Imagine what that did to the spirit, generation after generation. Theft more than bodies and labor. The face of the father was the theft. The face of the father. The face that should have resembled everybody's granddaddy in the family resembled a stranger from another world. And our ancestors kept the faith too. Anyhow, sang the hymns, kept Abraham as their father anyway, even with a stolen picture on the wall, because something in their spirit knew the real face even when their eyes had never seen it. But the text stuck. The words always remain. The text still states that Abraham was born in Ur. Text still says he walked across the desert. The text still states that he entered Egypt and was received in the court of Pharaoh. The text still says his second wife was an African woman from Egypt. The text goes on to claim that his son Ishmael was the progenitor of the Arab peoples. The text still says his line went down through David to Jesus. The text still has circumcision, already 1,000 years old in Africa, as the sign of his covenant. Any person with a Bible and the patience to read beyond the parts they've heard 100 times can walk through every receipt we just walked through and come to the same picture. The text has no power over the cover-up. The cover-up has power only over the imagination. And the moment a person decides to look at what is really written, the imagination can be retrained. Now, take it home. Abraham was a father, the ancient patriarch, a man who held his family near across 1,000 miles of desert, A man who had accumulated such a household that his trained servants could make up a small army. A man who bargained with God himself for the sake of the righteous people in a doomed town. A man who raised 2 sons who fathered 2 of the largest people groups on the earth. A man who lived 175 years and who was buried by his sons in the same land he had entered as a stranger. All black grandfathers who have held a family together across hard miles walk in Abraham's line. What Abraham did when he walked out of Ur is what every black great-granddaddy who ever moved his whole household north during the Great Migration was doing, packing what he owned into a single suitcase and walking into a city he had never seen because something in his spirit told him to go. Every black patriarch that ever sat at the head of a Sunday dinner table with 3 generations around him and gave thanks for a journey that nobody else in the family understood was carrying the same kind of weight that Abraham was carrying. The line didn't go past us. The line hit us. Every face at that table is a branch of the same tree that began with one dark-skinned man under the stars. Hearing God promise him that his descendants would be more numerous than the grains of sand on the seashore. We are some of the seeds. We always were. And here's the final piece. God told Abraham that through him, all the families of the earth would be blessed. All the families. Several. Not the Euro ones. Not those who would later paint his portrait. All of those. And the blessing would flow through every nation on earth. And the man God chose to flow that blessing through was a brown-skinned, African-looking patriarch from the southern Iraqi desert. The blessing came first through a black man. The original covenant was carved into a black body. The first promise was made to a black father whose descendants would father everybody who would ever come into that covenant. We were not the last of the family arriving. We didn't get adopted in. We weren't the cousins on the branch to the side. Someone painted us out of the picture and said we'd been let in through the back door. And we'd been sitting in the patriarch's own tent all the while. The fact is, we had the front door already. The tent was ours already. The covenant was ours already. The Father was our Father always. And the picture coming into focus now is the picture that was supposed to be there all along. Pass this on. Tell your grandfathers in your family. Tell the young brothers about to walk into a Sunday school class and see another painting of a pale European patriarch on the wall. Tell every cousin wondering why none of the founders of the faith look like anyone at the family reunion. It's not because we weren't there. Somebody's blacked us out deliberately, but the paint is cracking. The paint is gone. The stone underneath is still the same color as always. Abraham was a black man. Sarah was a black lady. Hagar was a black woman. Ishmael was a son of the black. Isaac was a son and a black son. The entire tent was a black family camping under a starry sky and listening to a black patriarch tell them about the God who had called him out of a city and promised to make his name great forever. If this opens something up for you tonight, share it with the elders and the young ones in your family that need to hear it before somebody else gets to them with a different picture first. Leave me a comment and tell me what Abraham looked like in the first Bible you ever held. I want to see how far back this paint job goes. And stay close because there is a whole lot more of this picture that we still have to bring into light.